Phil Laney is an entrepreneurial leader who is passionate about revolutionizing education and living spaces. As CEO of blendedteaching.com, he is pioneering tech-driven teaching methods. Prior to this, Phil founded a company called Lively, which is a London-based co-living venture that was acquired in 2023. Phil's career spans real estate, finance, and recruitment, and he's always driven by innovation. His work at Ascension Training and roles at Realster Group and Deutsche Bank showcase his expertise. Phil's commitment to innovation continues to shape industries and empower individuals worldwide. Today I have Phil Laney. Phil is the CEO and founder of Blended Teaching. It's a educational platform which is innovating in so many different ways around how to teach people better, cheaper, faster, and more effectively. So Phil, welcome. Glad to have
Thanks
you.
very much, Dan. Great to be here.
Great, great. So Phil, tell me, obviously we know each other, we've worked together, but tell me a little bit about your background, tell the people that are listening about your background, what you've done, how you got here.
Okay, I'm going to do like the 30-second version, if possible.
Whatever version you like, go for it.
I never do the 30 seconds. I try to, but I never do that.
Okay.
Okay, so graduated in aerospace engineering, went out, lived in Japan, came back, did a master's in real estate finance, went into real estate investment banking and private equity. That's where I met this guy. And we spent the best part, well, I spent about 3 years or something like that at Deutsche Bank and down
No,
in the
I didn't last that long, so.
yeah. I remember many long evening chats of like, what the hell are we doing here? Like 2 a.m. in the morning, wandering around the back streets of London. So that was interesting. It was like a really good learning ground of skills and like how to work. I think of it as like a place of learning how to work. But if you stay too long, you get a bit kind of into the system, get the golden handcuffs. Anyway, I did that for probably better part of 10 years or just under 10 years. I eventually went and raised my own fund because I wanted to step out of the system. I wanted to create my own vehicle and I wanted to invest into assets where we can make a difference directly through
real estate assets, these are, right? Like real estate
yeah,
assets.
Real estate stuff.
Yeah.
So we thought that housing really struggled in places like London. You've got all these young professionals that are completely disconnected from each other. Couldn't we create, first of all, housing, which is much better quality, which has some level of servicing, so young professionals aren't stuck trying to find toilet paper and all that stuff. They can really go out and make connections. And can we put them in a community with each other where they're connected so that they can build that community more easily, less friction? Cities are lonely places and it's expensive. So if we can do anything to make it less lonely, less expensive, we'll do that. So we started buying up all these assets. We've got investment from someone that's been really, really helpful to us in the past. Has been a wonderful kind of friend and mentor throughout this journey too. And we ended up getting, I think eventually we got a load of VC backing for the business. We got to about 1,000 beds of co-living, what is known as co-living. But really what we cared about was connecting the people, how you create this kind of environment and a greater sense of belonging. And so that worked really well. It was a tough ride into COVID because it was housing for young professionals in cities. And not many stayed in cities during COVID, many went back home. And so that business went whoop, and then whoop, and then rose up afterwards a little bit, and we just sold it. But during that journey, I think I learned how to kind of build a startup to some degree. I learned kind of the framework of thinking about kind of tech-enabled businesses. And I'm really, really passionate about education. So we started leaning into how do we marry together that kind of need for community and that need for supporting each other with education. And it kind of dawned on us quite quickly that there's this real problem for students in the higher education space. And in fact, at all levels of education, but higher education was one where we were quite familiar with. And we said, well, students don't like to study from textbooks anymore. Reading is not like the primary mode of learning for many of the younger generation. And so these younger generation are growing up with YouTube, they're growing up with Netflix, Masterclass. Why on earth do they go into university and pay $300 per class for a textbook, which, at the end of the class, if it wasn't a digital textbook, you'd hear them opening it and you'd hear the spine cracking because it's the first time they've ever
Also
opened.
because yeah, or it's been like resold to so many different people through the years, right? It's like used textbooks. I mean, that was the thing, and you buy used textbooks, they're expensive, right? So
Yeah, there's this funny thing that's happening in the world of textbooks, which is textbook costs go up because people resell them to each other and they don't make the revenue anymore. So to make the revenue, the publishers charge more, and of course, as they charge more, the new purchases goes down and down and
I
down.
had never thought about that, but that makes sense. That makes
Well,
sense. Yeah,
it's an
yeah,
industry in a death
yeah.
spiral, and I
Right.
think one of the causes of it being in a death spiral is because it's no longer fit for purpose for the audience.
Right.
Um, So you have this thing where you have a small number of experts and professors that make these textbooks, and you now have a decreasing number of students using them, but they're still required in the educational
Mm.
program. So we thought, is there something we can do? Can we work with the community of professors? Can we make this much more of a tool built by a wider group of professors, which are used by a very wide group of professors to teach these students and help the students learn? And we
Mm.
realized that it's like masterclass. We've got to lead this kind of combination of masterclass come TikTok. And TikTok is kind of trivializing it. TikTok's amazing, don't get me wrong. But this is like this beautiful, beautiful videos put down into bite-sized chunks, step-by-step learning with tons of different resources, whether it's auto-graded assignments, discussions, quiz banks, all these things that help to reinforce the learning for students. So now when a student comes into their class, instead of just, and they'll use these through these learning management systems, Canvas and Blackboard. So the professor will build a class, and instead of integrating a traditional digital textbook, they'll integrate blended teaching, and it appears directly within Canvas and Blackboard, and it's a really good experience for students, whether they're doing a live class or an asynchronous online class.
And okay, so now we've gotten to the present day. I'll add a few interesting tidbits about. So you're British, obviously, right? Moved to Japan. Uh, Many people don't know this, but Phil was a semi-professional breakdancer when he was in Japan, right? So, uh,
Tried to
and
be.
what's that?
I tried to be. I couldn't pay the bill. I had to quit in the end because I couldn't pay. You had to be a good dancer to pay the bills. You know, I couldn't quite pay the bill. So.
You got to be good enough to at least try. So anyway, that's impressive to me. Um, and now you're living in the U.S., right? In Georgia. So in my home country. Now we are up to the present day. One question I have about this business when I first learned about it is, what's the reaction of the educators, like the traditional educators, to kind of getting on board with something like this? I mean, I think that there were some overtures towards doing online learning, even starting 10 years ago or so. There was a couple of platforms doing it, but now you really see like universities doing this much, much more. So, can you bring us up to speed a little bit about like what's the traditional university kind of system and approach in the United States to using kind of multimedia tools like this from third parties?
Right. So there is a lot of examples of where universities are using third-party resources, and the textbook is the prime example.
Mm-hmm.
And so our question was, would they use video instead of text? And we tested it. The answer is yes, like overwhelmingly yes. And you can see that. COVID is this great example. As we came into COVID and students started studying asynchronously. Now, asynchronously is a somewhat fancy term for meaning they study in their own time. They're
Right.
watching the videos rather than being in class with a live webcast. So
Mm-hmm.
we moved into a lot more asynchronous learning at universities during COVID. And then secondly, professors also started doing webcasts and things like this, where they'd film themselves and some students would dial in live and then some would watch the later. So yeah, video does work, and it is working increasingly. And that's also happening because students are working a lot and studying in the evenings and things like this. So the types of universities, types of students vary significantly across the US. So this has always been and is increasing in terms of the commonality of use. Like it's really, really commonplace. But the problem is, I'm going to make up a number, which is wrong. Let's say there's 100,000 finance profs out there, people teaching finance, instructors teaching finance across the US. That's probably a gross underestimate, frankly. During COVID, almost everyone is making videos to teach the students.
Mm-hmm.
And they're making the same videos. They're making time value of money. They're making forms of business organization. They're making all these same videos, but they're not Hollywood script writers. They're not editing experts. They're not producers. These people are experts at teaching. They're experts at research. And that's where if you were to say, I want the highest and best use of people's time, that's where you'd want their time to go, not trying to make videos at home with almost no budget and no experience. So we said, well, could we kind of basically work with a number of professors, as many as we can kind of feasibly work with, to design the content and put a lot of budget behind it, make a film studio, get the best possible people to make video, and then distribute it to the people that are, struggling hard to make this stuff, and give it to students at a lower cost than the students are currently paying for a textbook.
Right.
So it's a win for the students. They pay less to access it than they would from the textbook. It completely replaces the textbook. And for the professors now, they have this best-in-class resource that students love to learn from. Like, the feedback is really positive, and they can plug and play without having to do the work themselves. And they can now focus on kind of the higher value tasks, like helping students directly, researching. So it was such a win-win across both sides of the marketplace.
And
it seemed like a great place to work.
so in essence, like, you're kind of replacing the textbook. It's like a textbook. It's like a modern day version of the textbook.
Yeah.
But and actually that wasn't intuitive to me when I first looked at it. I actually looked at, like, well, look, you're replacing the teacher, you're replacing the professor in a way, right? In which case the professor, of course, would potentially see this as a threat. So can you talk a little bit about how the professor sort of fits in with this, and how do they feel about it? How do they feel about using it? I think we learned during COVID that I mean, during COVID, there was this whole thing of, like, well, like, everyone can just learn online and, like, do it from video from their home. But then people really started to appreciate the value of in-person interaction, both in the workplace and in learning. And, maybe you've had some experiences with this reflection, and perhaps that, as I said, like, if you're replacing the textbook, it's a very different type of proposition from a penetration perspective than trying to replace, like, the school itself and its brand and all the rest of this stuff, right?
So the fundamental secret sauce of blended teaching is we are infrastructure for professors. We exist to, whatever professors need in terms of education experiences for their students, we exist to deliver that for professors. And so we are champions of professors. We work all day, every day with professors, the community we build as professors. And it's a really rewarding experience, because we get to see that professors are really excited to free up time, work in areas which have the maximum impact from them, which is directly interacting with the students, teaching the students. So when someone is struggling, they can actually spend the time to help, versus having this, like, list of other things that they've got to do in terms of creating classes, preparing materials, or grading. We can help with all of that and allow the professors to do what they do best, both teaching and researching. So it's been really well received by professors. And of course, there was that initial question, are you replacing me? I don't think now that's a generalized concern, now that people see it in action. And what's happening is universities and professors are launching additional classes where they said, okay, I was just going to teach one class, now I can teach 3 because it takes me less time and I can now make more of an impact on students. Teaching is a joy, rather than, this kind of combined joy and burden. That's been a really rewarding outcome. So that's one side of the marketplace. The other side of the marketplace obviously being, we are replacing digital textbooks. And I think when you think of innovation in the world of the textbook publisher space, it's a little bit like, instead of having a physical textbook which you open, they kind of opened it and started scanning it. And page after page, you've got scans of the textbook. And they're like, great, we got a digital textbook. And that's the resource that people have been really engaging with, because it's all that's been available. So what we've really, really been keen on is, like, understanding what kind of tools, what kind of videos, what kind of engagement do students want, what really helps their learning. And, this is a work in progress. I don't think that anyone has a great answer for this, but certainly we spend most of our waking hours thinking about that kind of question.
Okay, very interesting. How does a student that teaches or that learns in this kind of environment, how do they study for a test?
So you've got three, let's say, 3 general ways in which students are tested in university classes. the first is that you have, and you're assigned credits for your score on each of these things usually, and so you get a set or some points or whatever the term may be. So the first one might be you have lots of like pop quizzes. And so you'll have all these micro tests throughout, which make sure that you keep pace with the class and the learning. So that's one. So when you come and study with using a blended teaching resource rather than a traditional digital textbook, it's very similar in the sense that for all of the content you have, we have a ton of what we call formative quiz questions. So formative means it's helping you learn. Summative means it's testing how much you learned. So we do a lot of formative work. Oh, I got a thumbs up there.
Yeah, but good job on that
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Sue.
one.
So we do lots and lots of these formative questions and multimodal kind of learning methods to get you to a point where when you get to a summative quiz, you are prepared to go into it if you've done the work. So that's really not significantly different in terms of the way that it's traditionally been done. Because I think it works, by the way. I think it's a good method. The second way is some classes just will have one big final exam, or they'll have one before the break and then one final. So they'll have two exams. Again, similarly, we put all these resources that help students prepare themselves for those when it comes up. And the final method, which I really like as well, is this like experiential type assessment where you do group projects or you do something like that, and a lot of the grade you'll gain from doing those and maybe a few pop quizzes. And with that, when you come and blended teaching is great for experiential learning because you get to see professors, you get to see experts valuing, let's take, there's a lot of, we're working in finance. So let's say you're valuing stocks, valuing bonds, things like this. You'll get to see how it's done in practice. And then you get to go as part of a group or as an individual project, pick some bonds, pick some companies, start valuing things yourself and creating some analysis around it. And so we have everything that will lead you up to the assessments that are going to get you your grade.
Okay. And do kids still use pencil and paper to like write things down and do exercises, or has that also been now fully digitized? I'm showing my age here. Yeah.
I don't think even I use pen and paper anymore, and that's sad because I love using pen and paper.
Yeah, I mean, my son in school, they don't teach cursive writing anymore. They luckily, like, he does know what a pencil and an eraser is, but like, I mean, I don't know, maybe in the US they're just, completely putting this all on the iPad or something like this, making us dependent upon technology producers completely.
Oh, I walked around my 7-year-old's school the other day, and we were going to go see her in class and all that stuff. They're all there on laptops. I was like, wait, when did this happen? How did they get these? And they don't. So in the UK, this was funny because we moved a couple of years ago from the UK, and I got two girls. And the youngest, when she was like 5 or 6, was learning cursive writing in the UK. And when we moved to the US, she stopped cursive writing and went to the, I don't know what the other term is, non-cursive writing. And I was stomping around. I was irate about the whole thing. Anyway, they taught her in the end. So about 8 to pick up cursive over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things that when you do them, you learn them best, right? And just watching them, might not be good enough. But anyway, we're digressing a little bit. So listen, what do you think is the general mission then of what you're doing, but also the industry in general? I mean, you're addressing a pretty big industry. It sounds like you're making it relevant to today's student, right? Which is probably a student that grew up with all these multimedia devices that we didn't grow up with. And they're making it fun. Like when I look at your website, and the guy teaching finance, like he's wearing a funny hat and he's doing all these weird things. It's like, so you're making it kind of interactive where, I mean, you always hope to get like a professor in university that's like cool and fun and quirky, but also knows how to teach and really relate to the topic. Not all of them are gifted enough to do that, obviously. And also then they don't have to spend the time lecturing. They can spend the time, as you said, like teaching, when they're together in class. So do you see that this is a trend that is kind of continuing and you're at the spearhead of it, or is it more specialized? Like what's happening kind of in this space? Right?
Well, so the industry is going through huge changes. And, these are behemoths. These are very, very large organizations. And so they tend to, like giant ships, they tend to move quite slowly or change direction quite slowly. Having said that, I'm seeing incredible change very, very quickly just in the couple of years that we've been working with US universities directly. And I think part of that is there's an affordability issue. That's one. and two, there's a physical access issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the number of students that you can attract globally is extraordinarily large and growing very, very rapidly as areas of the world are getting better access to the internet, are getting slightly higher GDP per capita. It's meaning that people's focus on not just subsistence, but now education is kind of opening up. There's a potential for it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there is no better place in the world than US universities to capture that. They deliver the world's, in many instances, the world's greatest education, I think. And so the use and adoption of technology to help teach people, not just remotely, but at scale, I think is really, really important. And there are some universities that are always first on this, like Stanford, MIT, things like this. These are universities that have the budgets and they have the Hollywood producer quality people
Mm-hmm.
in-house to be able to build these tools and deliver them.
Mm-hmm.
But the other university, they don't. It's professors that are dealing with this, and professors are researching and teaching. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
have time to then do this on top? So we are the infrastructure. That's what we want to be, is we want to come along and say, guys, you can deliver education at scale globally.
Mm-hmm.
And you can deliver it to your students really well, but you can deliver it to new students too. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're offering, is this like super, super high quality learning experience that the university is in control of, that they can deliver at scale.
And it's only offered via universities, or can people buy this type of content individually at this stage?
So we focus on universities, but there's this really interesting crossover, and it's a market we don't spend much time on, but we get a lot of pressure from to that's what we do, is corporates and corporate training.
Yeah,
So
I was about to ask about this. Yeah,
yeah,
because I think a lot of times people get to the job and they've been educated at a university, but really a university is about teaching you how to think and teaching you how to solve problems and making sure that you know how to work hard and things like this. But then you get to your actual job, and there might be like a very nuanced skill set that you've never been exposed to, right? And so experience then matters. That's why they say, oh, you have to experience things, because otherwise you can't learn what's really going on in a job, right?
yeah, it's really hard. Like skills-based learning is really hard to deliver in general education system because it takes a long time and a lot of
Mhm.
repetition. And courses are not really set up for that. The courses are set up to deliver quite a wide range of learning outcomes for students in order for them to ladder up and learn the next set of principles.
Mhm.
And so it's really principles they're learning and theories and some application of those. But to be good at something, to be good at financial modeling, you're talking, thousands of hours of financial modeling. Now, I think you only get that on the job. But the second part of that is we can actually have experts teach you the skill and give you enough to say, let's say, 50 hours of practice.
Yeah.
And this is what corporate really needs, actually.
Mhm.
So there's two different ways that corporates think about this type of training. One is I'm taking graduates and I need to upskill them in certain key areas. So let's say that I'm joining a bank, I'm going to become a loan officer. Cool, you've got all the basics, you probably graduated in finance, something like this. Now you're going to need to actually have the genuine skills of, okay, here's actually the elements that go into credit reports. Here's genuinely how you think about credit risk. Here's how the bond markets actually work in detail. This kind of thing might be useful to those people. And these organizations will have these graduate training programs or these annual training programs that continuously upskill these team members. There's now a second thing, which is corporates looking to skip out of universities. So to hire pre-university and give people the knowledge they need to be really effective in the space they're going to be, as well as a more generalized education.
Can we unpack that a little bit more? Because I think this is like a whole other dimension, right? Like of course, I have colleagues back in the US, right, many of them have kids that are older than me, and they're starting to think about university. And of course, there's a lot of things that go on in the US university system, which I think are inequitable, like the brand value of the university that then gets you like into a better job application pool and all the rest of this mumbo jumbo, right? So I think we could talk about how what you're doing could potentially level that playing field. But then there's the other thing is to say like, well, wait a second, if it's any way difficult to get into Harvard or Princeton or some great school, but these are smart kids, at the end of the day, they're really just going to go and work for corporations, or they're going to work for somebody. And couldn't they just go and do that directly? Because in a lot of ways, you do learn things at university. I mean, I can speak from my own experience. You definitely learn things. You mature, you're 4 years older, right? Like that's a big factor. But the other thing is that it's kind of a indicator to your potential employer that you're capable of getting things done because the university puts like challenges in front of you. They give you lots of work to do. You have to balance those things. You have to kind of learn how to do your laundry and eat and all the rest of these things all at the same time. And so that you can like function as an adult. But from an academic perspective, maybe you could just step right into a job. You would probably miss out on a lot of very interesting things that you learn in university, I think, like about, things that you might not apply in the job. But technically you could do it. And depending upon who you are, you might just say, well, wait a second, like I can go get a decent job if I educate myself in this domain. And then I'm just going to skip going to university because it's also so expensive, right? If
Well,
the corporation is open to doing that, right? Yeah.
so organizations like, accounting firms who are
Yeah.
struggling to get, staff nowadays, struggling to get
Yeah.
people to like go into the industry.
Yeah.
Or you've got Google, who
Mhm.
need people with a specific set of skill sets, like, software engineers, devs, developers. Um, they are seeking different ways to identify and bring in talent and train that talent so they can be effective at an earlier age. And
Mhm.
for Google's and the Deloitte's, it's either about, can I just get people? Can I even get them? Or can I get them at a lower cost than I would do if I tried, if I'm Google, I'm trying to hire them out of Facebook.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there's the war for talent moves earlier and earlier in the journey of an individual. And you mentioned equitable. I don't, it's really hard to split the value of the brand of the university from the things that you learn because there's this middle
Mhm.
bucket of intangibles. Like I've got a tangible piece of paper that shows that I've got X% score in my grade for corporate finance class.
Mhm.
But it's those intangibles, which is, I know how to negotiate through a complex situation with I get involved in the political scene, I get involved in all these things. I work in
Yeah,
the
it's to say your network in society, the learning that you do socially, like which I think is that's valuable within school. I think that's why you still need like a physical learning environment is because it's one thing is about skills and the other thing is about like these soft skills of just like how do you interact, how do you challenge ideas, how do you react when people challenge your ideas, et cetera, which I think you can't really do unless you're in a kind of a
I,
multiple person social environment, right?
I think it's, yeah, but it's also it's kind of unfair to think that you get that through university, but you don't get that because you're still living, right? You're not at university. It's you've got a different set of experiences that are coming your way. But I would certainly say it's
Yeah, but
probably,
that's the inequitable thing, right? Like, is that like,
yeah.
someone sees that you went to University X and they're like, well, University X has a program that makes sure that you do all of those things or encourages you to do all those things. Where if you
Mm.
just come straight out of high school, perhaps you're really good at those things too, but you're not getting the same sort of look because you don't have like the stamp. And I think this is kind of like the thing which ultimately could start to even out over time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible, and I think I kind of look at it less at the brand of the university. I think more about university or not university.
Mhm.
And so it's completely inequitable from a perspective of an employer when they see someone with a degree and without a degree. There's very
Mhm.
different paths that they'll send people on, which
Mhm.
may or may not be right. I don't know the data that
Mhm.
supports whether it's actually a fair thing or an unfair thing, or is it's reasonable or unreasonable, not fair or unfair, that's different, but reasonable
Mhm.
or unreasonable. But what I certainly think is, the mission of blended teaching is how do we facilitate people to get the best possible quality of education?
Mhm.
And we focus on professors at universities. Companies do pick up the content to use for training, but it's mostly with graduates. I'm not, what I'm excited about is universities themselves can now reach out further. They can offer more at a slightly lower cost using tools like this. And whether it's blended teaching, there'll be other tools too that help facilitate this. But I think
Mhm.
universities themselves, I don't know that universities generally wake up as various different departments and say, hey, let's charge more.
Mhm.
I think actually there's this real kind of tension, which is, how do we make this accessible to people? And blended
Yeah,
teaching seems to be part of that kind of movement, let's say.
yeah. I mean, the cost of education is just when I look at this, it's like eye-watering, right? I am in the
Yeah,
United States. I mean, here in
yeah.
Europe, it's totally different because it's funded by the government, but it does make you wonder. I mean, there's beautiful physical infrastructure at many of these schools, right? It's very expensive to maintain that. So there, I think that there's a justification around the cost. And one could argue that if you expand the size of your addressable market, you could potentially bring, you could bring pricing tiers into this, right? Which would also allow so universities to potentially be more sustainable, or maybe you have less universities, fewer of them, but they're able to address more students, right? Or the same number of students, right?
I do think that tiering
Yeah,
is happening
yeah,
behind the scenes naturally anyway.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you've got the difference between out-of-state and in-state students. You've got all sorts of ways of getting some financial support, not just with student loans.
Mhm,
But I don't know that the efficacy of those is kind of by the by. But effectively, universities are launching more and more online asynchronous programs, and what that
mhm,
does is it's allowing students to work full time and study in
mhm,
the evenings and the weekends, and so they're able to earn degrees without having such significant debt. And I think that's amazing because if you go back 20 years or even go back pre-COVID, a lot more of it was like you have to be here in person, you have to be here in the day, and it's very hard to access that for so many people.
Yeah,
Well, now
because they're trying to create that learning environment, right? Like, like you have to
yeah,
be there at the university because the university wants to maintain the quality of that in-person learning. But if there's another customer, if you will, who says like, look, I just can't afford that, or I can't be there, or I can't be on site, and therefore I accept a different outcome, but it's still a very good outcome, then I think that that's also fine, right? So, yeah.
we've and this is so the blended teaching tool is there to really, really help to drive that quality of experience outside the classroom.
Hmm.
It's used very much in classes which are live and in person, and they
Hmm.
use it instead of a textbook, which has been great. But secondly, it's been used to help build very quickly and at significantly lower cost asynchronous online classes. And we've seen professors and departments be able to launch classes they would have launched because they didn't have access to enough professors or enough time or the resources. So now they're launching these asynchronous classes at a much lower cost for students that are working full time.
Hmm.
And that honestly, for us, our entire mission again is we want to increase the access of education.
Hmm.
We do that through universities, through professors, and it's really rewarding to see this start to kind of take shape little
Yeah, and
by
of
little.
course they're facilitating that. That's great. What about the community aspect of this, right? Like, so do you have functions or features that allow the students that are accessing that education through that medium to interact with each other, to do the things that you would do in class, like listen to someone like pontificate a concept and then you're like, hey, look, I hadn't thought of that. Like all those great things that you do by having a great kind of classroom environment where you have good peer learning, which I think is a big value, particularly some of these really high level institutions. They're attracting like very, very smart and very high level motivated people, and being around those kind of communities is very helpful. But you can also create that kind of community in different ways, right? So,
Well, so right now, what we do is we plug into the university infrastructure like Canvas and Blackboard,
okay.
and we don't ourselves build community for students yet. I think
Okay.
this come, and I think it's an important thing. We are always questioning what is the most valuable thing we do next to increase the experience. Where community has been really, really impactful for us is among the professors. And
Mm-hmm.
so the traditional textbook model is one or two professors will write a textbook. And that will then, you'll get a power law distribution because any given subject, if it's big enough, like corporate finance, financial management, will have 4 or 5 competing textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds will have been written, but 4 or 5, and ultimately 2 or 3 will be the big ones that people use. And I would describe it as like relatively low engagement of the professor community in building of this. Those same professors will hold on to that. They might get people to ghostwrite chapters, or they'll credit chapters to people throughout. But what we've done is we've said, actually, this business is all about professors. So we built this film studio and we fly professors here to film with us. Professors create the content. We've had, I think, coming up to 20 professors film with us now so far.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is creating content from a number of different angles and a number of different voices, which students love. It's
Hmm.
got, there's benefits and drawbacks because if you have lots of different professors creating content, sometimes the wording used is slightly different, or sometimes the content might overlap slightly, which can be a good thing, but there might be gaps. And so it's our job to identify that and design it together with professors. But the strong point there is that you get people from all sorts of different backgrounds representing all sorts of different, um, you know, kind of journeys for students that they start to engage with. Oh, I really like the way this professor, I don't like this professor as much, or I really like this one. It's this really interesting thing where if you're stuck with one professor, that professor, no matter the quality of the professor, may actually be easy to engage with for some students, but less easy to engage with for others. So this has been
Right.
quite an interesting thing, actually.
Yep.
Um, but we've got these professors, a wide range of professors that come and film, and they're great communicators. And these professors then share their work with other professors who are using it in their classrooms. And these professors are helping to create materials too and contribute it into the organization. So we become this centralized platform for distributing these things that professors are creating. And we're helping professors in that creation. So whether it's videos, whether it's assignments and all these things. And, unlike the traditional publisher model, where as students pay, most of the money goes to the publisher, a little bit goes to one or two professors. What's happening now is as the money comes in, because we're a tech company, our ability to distribute the money, we're not printing textbooks, we're not pulping things, we're not sending loose leaf binders, we don't have armies of salespeople going around calling professors, emailing professors, having coffee 24/7. What's actually happening is the money's coming in and a lot more gets distributed out to this very wide body of professors, which compensates them for like really investing their time and resource to building these great things.
And, and they do that, the professors are doing that on spec, basically. So you're not having to pay them. They're doing this on like a share of the revenue that's coming in when their class is being used. Yeah.
So it's a model that's very similar to masterclass.
Okay.
So you might say to Oliver Stone, we want you to teach a class in um, directing. Which, by the way,
Mhm.
I think actually they do. Or they might
Yeah.
say, I don't know, any celebrity come in and teach about X, and they will get a share of that revenue for a period of time. Now, with blended teaching, professors get a share in the revenue for perpetuity. If they
Mm.
if they create something, they should enjoy it forever.
Hmm.
If we can help generate revenues from that, then they
Mm.
should enjoy that. And so we are effectively just a distribution platform. Now, the
Hmm.
reason why we make content is because it just didn't exist. Like we didn't know what good looked like. There wasn't anything out there. So we started by making stuff, and now we're designing it so that we can just give the instructions on how to make stuff and have all the facilities available for professors to come in and do it. Um, but quality really matters. What we don't
Mm.
want is YouTube. We don't want unlimited videos all teaching the same stuff of wildly varying quality because you don't know what to trust. You don't know what to pick. Professors don't want that. Professors
Right.
want to say, building a class in markets, for
Mm.
freshman. What do you have? Oh, it's great. We've got this textbook this digital video textbook pre-built, and we've
Mm.
got 15 chapters. You're probably only going to want 8 of them. Let me help you design your class. And our platform will
Okay.
help. Like,
And
we'll
then
give
the
them.
university is paying you. You get like a subscription or like what's the revenue model?
So the revenue model is currently a student will go into a class
Yeah.
and they will have a required resource. And that required resource is typically a textbook and maybe some other digital tool that supplements the textbook, which is kind of, these digital textbooks aren't great. And so they will pay anywhere between 100 and in some cases 350, $400 for the resources that go with that class. And usually
Hmm.
you have to buy it because some assignments are run through it or part of your grade comes from it. And we replace all of that and it's $75 for the student. And we're a subscription model, so you get $75 for 4 months. But
Uh-huh.
actually, if you've got multiple classes, if you buy a year's worth of subscription, which I think is $150, you can have as many classes as you want. You might be taking 8 classes with blended teaching, and it's $150 for the year. Job
So the
done.
student is introduced to your platform via the university, but the student is actually the contact that you have. So you have a database of students essentially that are delivered to you by a university.
Yes.
I mean, from an awareness model, that's fantastic in terms of like go to market. I mean, that's a great model because it's not like the student doesn't have an association to you; they have an account with you then, right?
Well, actually,
Yeah.
we don't want to be the thing that students think of. We're not, we're just a tool for professors.
Mm,
And so when you engage with blended teaching, although you're engaging with beautiful videos and you'll see this kind of brand awareness of the quality of things,
mhm,
what we're trying to achieve is they link that to the university. So when they go onto
mm,
the platform, they're not leaving the university system. They're still staying in campus and Blackboard. They're seeing
mhm,
the university logo and they're seeing their professor with, it's interspliced with their professor too, talking through things.
mhm,
So what's really interesting is we want to elevate the professor. We don't want to take the limelight in any way. We want to push all of the accruing brand benefit and like excitement from students to learn because the tool is really much more engaging for them. We want that to be the professor's benefit.
mhm. Fantastic. Very interesting. Um, we're getting close to time, but I have a question I want to ask, which is potentially it's not off topic, but it's a bit of extension of the topic. So when I look at what you're doing, I think it kind of makes education ultimately available to many, many more people, right? Either it's via the node of the university or just this sort of methodology of learning becomes much more refined, and then people can, from anywhere in the world, learn things that they would never have been able to do because they couldn't afford to like travel and live in the United States or in, other places. And, not to say that universities are not good in other countries, they are, but I think it just opens up a lot of things. It opens up opportunity also for networking with people, from other places and other countries. Ultimately, then the entire kind of global population goes up in terms of its knowledge and skill set. You're no longer like, sewing clothes in a factory someplace. You're maybe able to do like computer coding or accounting or these types of different things. So, you're able to provide value and demand higher wage and the rest of this kind of thing. It begs the question, is there really space enough for all those people to provide all those services and still, does the world require all that to make itself run, right? Like it's like if you think about like, if there's 8 billion people or so on the planet, like at some like a large portion of them are not really providing loads of value beyond like daily subsistence, right? And of course, this is going to ultimately, it will take time, but ultimately then their capability to provide more value than that to whomever, themselves and to others, will go up, which is a great thing. But is it necessary, right? Like,
Yeah.
can the world function with like 25% of those people actually having that capability, which brings all these other societal questions into place is like, yeah, it's great that we can educate people, but if we can't like actually provide them work to do, then we have to like kind of pay for their living in another way. So like the whole economic model changes in a way. Because if you think about historically in the modern world, education and access to education has been really only available to like the very top levels of the society. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's such a fundamental question as
Mm,
to, if everyone's doing all this high level thinking,
mhm.
who's doing everything else? Who's doing
Well,
all the other
I
stuff?
mean, first of all, the high level thinkers will create ways to automate and mechanize all of that. So the other stuff can still get done, no doubt, right? But then, like, where does the rest of it go to? Like, you get to a point where, like, it doesn't really seem that everybody needs to spend 40 hours a week actually working, right? Because there's plenty of people that are providing tons of value for the society as a whole and things are functioning, right? Like, what more can we do? I mean, I suppose we could fly to different planets, right? But, like, at the end of the day, it does beg the question, right?
I think
Yeah.
I think the economic system, the way that humans create value, is changing so rapidly right now, and I'm really excited. And I'm a bit of a futurist, so I get really interested in what's going to happen in the next 100 years or so. But if you imagine that the more brains you have thinking about things, the better forms of technology we'll be able to create, and therefore we'll be able to basically fix the most pressing problems earlier on.
Mhm.
So we've got bipedal robots now. There's so many companies creating bipedal robots that there'll be so many menial tasks that will now be covered. The problem actually becomes one of resource. Like there is not
Mm.
enough materials in the earth to build all the battery packs that we're going to want to build. There's all
Yeah.
sorts of problems that we need to solve that we've not got close to solving because, frankly, humans aren't intelligent enough. I think with AI,
Yeah.
on the other hand, there's a bunch of problems around natural resources and generating energy that I think will actually be solved. Hopefully, not in a matrix style where we become human battery packs. And so there's a sense of, I don't know if you remember that, all the buildings and the Europe. Um,
Vaguely.
so the idea here is that I think we will need to leave Earth. And to me,
Mm.
the challenge is not can we build, can we do a SpaceX? Can we do a mission to Mars? To me, the challenge is can we educate two-thirds to three-quarters of the world to the level that actually they can start to engage with really, challenging, thorny issues around technology in the future. Right now, a lot of time is spent, resources of the earth are just been surviving. And it's terribly sad, and it's a terrible waste as
Yeah, I
well.
mean, it's a huge portion of the population, right? Like, imagine if you convert that portion of the population, which is the majority, to like really critical thinking and applying to problems. I mean, it's just like a ladder at the end of the day, right? Um, and that's what I'm saying. I think that the traditional activity then that person would do would like, yeah, we don't need, 1 billion accountants, right? We don't need them, right?
No.
Like, what was so like, we have to yeah, we have to find productive things for those people to do so that ultimately they can continue to survive as well, like, like earn money or whatever resources to be able to eat and do all the rest of those things. Yeah, it's a very interesting problem, right?
Yeah.
But it would also be nice just to kind of like ride your bike all the time and like just hang out and chill,
But
right?
that, that's just not the nature of the human from what I observe, which is like, I think it was Keynes, the economist, said that roughly around this time or sometime before this, we'd all be working 4-hour weeks or 4-hour days. Well, I can't remember what it was exactly. But, we continue to strive and
But
compete.
we could actually if one wanted to just like live at the level of like a good life at the what a good life was like at the time he was living, probably that would be possible, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's true. But it's all
yeah,
relative. Like a good life is
yeah,
a relative measure, not an absolute measure. And that's the problem,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
yeah. People are greedy. They always want more. Hey, listen, it'd be great talking to you. Thank you so much. Super interesting business. I think it's a very interesting space. We didn't talk about competitive set, but we'll let other people think about that. We'll obviously put the website on the online and share all this on social media. But very interesting and great, great, cool, clever go to market and all these things that seem very exciting. What you're doing.
Thanks, Dan. Look, I really appreciate you having me. Thanks for the time. And thanks for all the
Great.
preppers. Great questions.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. See you later.